Despite the former UFC star's less than stellar ending with the promotion, you can't deny the impact that Woodley has during his time with the company. Woodley grew up in Ferguson, Missouri, and the chosen one was a wrestling machine during his time at McClure High School, which he ended up being a two-time state finalist in wrestling by the time he transferred over to the University of Missouri. Now, the 38-year-old didn't necessarily have the easiest life down in Missouri. Woodley was one kid in a household filled with 15 different people. Growing up in the ghetto, the former UFC star had only two choices: get harassed and picked on every day, or join a gang and do the picking on. Woodley chose the latter. Throughout his rough childhood, Woodley grew up fighting on the streets. He's even been jumped and shot. However, the Missouri native managed to get through his high school as a top athlete and continued to shine as a wrestler throughout his college years, with the former UFC welterweight champion becoming a two-time All-American by his graduation in 2005. Fast forward to February 2009, and Tyron Woodley was inside the octagon facing the first MMA opponent, Steve Schneider. Guess what? Woodley beat him in a first-round TKO. And Tyron Woodley won again, but this time with a first-round submission over Jeff Karstens. Then Woodley got a chance to fight at the big stage, Strikeforce. The now-defunct MMA promotion housed some of the best MMA fighters at the time, such as Nick Diaz, Luke Rockhold, Robbie Lawler, Jorge Masvidal, Daniel Cormier, and Amanda Nunes. The new kid on the MMA block managed to get a huge victory over Salvador Woods via submission in the first round. The Missouri kid that was raised in a ghetto earned himself a 6-fight contract thanks to his impressive performance on June 6, 2009. The wins kept growing for Woodley each time he stepped into the octagon. Zach Light, Rudy Bears, Nathan Coy, Andre Galvo, Tarek Staffadine, Paul Daly, and Jordan Meehan were all dropped by the rising welterweight. At this time, Woodley was an MMA sensation with an undefeated record of 10-0, but his biggest challenge thus far would be for the vacant Strikeforce welterweight title. His opponent? Nate Marquardt. Marquardt was a veteran who's been dropping bodies since 1999. This guy stepped toe-to-toe against Anderson Silva when the Brazilian was at his unstoppable prime. Also, Marquardt held several titles from different promotions. The Juggernaut had a strong record of 31-10-2. Would Woodley be able to overcome the odds and win the Strikeforce welterweight championship? Unfortunately, no. Still, Woodley put in a highlight reel performance which earned him a shot at UFC 156 against Jay Heron. Woodley managed to bounce back with a first-round KO, and then he beat Josh Koscheck and Carlos Condit, and then Kelvin Gastelum. Those fights earned Woodley a UFC welterweight title bout against then-champion Robbie Lawler. Lawler was a beast inside of the octagon as the veteran was on a strong 5-fight streak thanks to his wins over Jake Ellenberger, Matt Brown, Johnny Hendricks, Rory McDonald, and Carlos Condit. Like Marquardt, Lawler was another veteran that the rising UFC star needed to beat to cement his status as a top welterweight. Tyron Woodley not only surpassed expectations at UFC 201, but the welterweight knocked out Lawler in less than 3 minutes, a feat that not many fighters could hold claim to. It was the fastest title win in UFC welterweight title history. So how did Tyron Woodley crush a veteran like Robbie Lawler? Well, it certainly wasn't because of Scooby Snacks. But seriously, striking was a key component that the UFC star worked on during his build-up to the fight. Woodley practiced on his boxing with simple exercises like sparring and footwork that helped make the Missouri native such an explosive force. For strength, speed deadlifts, jump shrugs, hang cleans, speed jerks, upright rows, good mornings, hang snatches, curls, and bench presses held the core strength of the fighter, but also made sure to boost Woodley's endurance and speed. Of course, a good diet is just as important as an intense workout. Woodley's diet wasn't much different from your typical fighter, with his main source of protein being oatmeal, fruit, fish, free-range eggs, grass-fed beef, protein powder, and whole grains. During this time, Woodley had to avoid dairy, gluten, refined foods, processed foods, hydrogenated fats, junk foods, and white carbs. Woodley was finally on top of the mountain, but the hardest part was far from over. Next up, Woodley fought Wonder Boy Stephen Thompson, and the entertaining bout resulted in a draw. So guess what? These guys played rock, paper, scissors to determine the UFC welterweight champion. Okay, so it wasn't that simple. These welterweights clashed once again at UFC 209, and Woodley came out on top. And Woodley continued to come out on top. Just ask Demian Maia and Darren Till. Were these wins the result of the same exercises that got Woodley the UFC welterweight title? Not exactly. Being the top dog meant that Woodley had to alter his style a bit. The key factor was that the then 170-pound champ had to train for 5-round fights. So what did Woodley add to his crazy training regime? The UFC champ would sprint on a popular stationary bike, Airdyne. He would get up to at least 85 RPMs for 30 seconds, jump off, do ball slams and burpees for another 30 seconds. The entirety of the exercise was for 30 minutes. But that isn't it. Woodley would be forced to use the Devil Machine to simulate a fight, the Versa Climber. 5-minute sprints with the 39-year-old aiming to go for 150 feet per minute, or at least 750 feet in the 5 minutes. These grueling exercises boosted Woodley's game until that fateful and tragic day. On March 2nd, 2019, Tyron Woodley not only lost the UFC Welterweight Championship, but the Chosen One was dismantled soundly by Kamaru Usman. The Nigerian Nightmare was the new kid on the block that was making waves at the 170-pound division. Usman entered the bout on a 13-fight winning streak. That's right, I said freaking 13-fight winning streak. 5 of those victories were by knockout. Usman may have not gotten the TKO at UFC 235, but he made Woodley look like an amateur that night. 4 successful title defenses and it was all over for Woodley. Unfortunately, Woodley had detailed how he went into a state of depression following his loss to Kamaru Usman. It wasn't just the fact that he was no longer on the top of the mountain, but it was also his lack of performance against the newly crowned champion that bothered him. Woodley had described the bout as a simulated experience for himself. Despite the fall of Woodley, he managed to get back into the gym and look to get back what used to be his, the UFC welterweight title. But he had to go through ultra-tough Gilbert Burns, who was lighting the division on fire at the moment. And Burns continued his dominance in the division, but this time against the former UFC welterweight champion. Sadly, Woodley never got his groove back and he ended up losing to Colby Covington and Vicente Luque before his UFC exit in April 2021. So where does Tyron Woodley go from here? The former UFC welterweight champion hasn't used the R word just yet, though his next venture inside a ring may be in boxing. Jake Paul is arguably the most talked about boxer on the planet right now, and Woodley has trash-talked the culture vulture plenty of times. Could we see Tyron Woodley versus Jake Paul soon? Only time will tell.